Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to what I think is going to be a fantastic conversation. You're listening to another in our series of interviews at the New Human Movement. And today we have one of the most storied entrepreneurs in American history, John Mackey. 1978, John borrows $45,000 from friends and family, starts an organic grocery store in Austin, Texas. This goes on to become Whole Foods, and probably all of us listening, if you live in the United States, you've had the pleasure of shopping there at some point. And ultimately, 2017, I think it gets sold to Amazon for 13 and some billion dollars, and has continued to grow and become more affordable and evolve and so on. And John's not just an entrepreneur; he's a deeply thoughtful person about business and about capitalism and where we go next, and about leadership. And we're going to explore all of that with John today. And by the way, we would highly commend John's books to you. You'll find them in all the usual places. So, John, thanks so much for connecting again, and welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Gary. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So, John, let me dive right into it. I was looking at your most recent book, Conscious Leadership, and I want to just play something back to kind of word for word there, quote that you had right at the beginning of that book. And you said conscious leaders, and I guess that's a lot better than being an unconscious leader. Conscious leaders, you said, put purpose first, and they're guided not just by profit, but by a vision that they contribute to the world. And then you follow that up. The next sentence, you said, they lead with love. Now, maybe we can unpack those two things for a moment, because obviously right now the idea of purpose is kind of hot. The Business Roundtable has said that companies need a purpose that goes beyond mere shareholder wealth. But why is this issue at the forefront now? Why are companies suddenly concerned? I mean, you could argue that companies through history have had a purpose. Henry Ford wanted to bring mobility, to the world, and Steve Jobs wanted to create computers that were beautiful and easy to use. So, what's new? Why is this so important now?
Great question, Gary. And I think business always has had purpose, and it hasn't always been conscious about it. Entrepreneurs tend to be doers and not theorists, but they're generally driven by some type of passion, something they're trying to realize in the world. And purpose ultimately goes back to, in every organization, every business, it goes back to some type of value creation it's doing for other people. And the purpose always resides in that value creation. And so that for the longest time was just sort of, let's put it in context. Doctors make a lot of money. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to obviously heal people. Teachers educate, architects design buildings, engineers construct things. Every one of the professions refers back to value creation that it's doing for other people. Now, it has to make money. Similarly, business has to make money. It's like my body has to produce red blood cells, but it doesn't follow that my purpose is to produce red blood cells. But if I don't produce them, I die. Business has to make money or it's going to die. So profits are a necessary condition for its existence. But it's not why the business exists. It ultimately creates value for its customers. And in creating value for its customers, and it connects with lots of different stakeholders, employees, suppliers, investors, in the communities that it's part of. And these are all interdependent. So ultimately that purpose is going to, of creating value for others, when we talk about purpose, and I think we got off of that track because I think business inherently always knew it was creating value for other people, but we started talking about maximizing long-term shareholder value. And it quickly became, we started putting the cart before the horse, that the goal became to maximize shareholder value rather than that's the product of actually creating value for customers. So you put purpose first, not because you're not trying to make money, but because you have to put purpose first, because purpose goes to the value proposition that every business is creating that will lead to shareholder value. And so we've gotten those confused. And I would also say by talking about maximizing profit, business has fallen into the hands of its enemies. because then it's easy to just say, well, you just only care about is money. You're greedy, you're selfish, you're exploitative. Money, 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 money. And so business gets stereotyped by intellectuals as basically not good. I mean, sociopathic almost. So it's very important that we put purpose first and we keep it first. But paradoxically, by putting purpose first, that will probably in the long term lead to the greatest amount of shareholder value creation. These are not opposites.
Talking to a lot of CEOs through the years, I mean, you for sure, John, on this point, also Richard Branson and others, there's certainly a group of CEOs who I think have always understood this. And they would tell you that profits is a measure of whether you're using society's resources wisely. If you're not profitable, you're destroying value for people. But they would also say that, depending on the executive, they'd either say that employees come first or customers come first. But then, profit is the scoreboard and not the game. And what you're describing, and I'd like you maybe to unpack this a little bit, how in so many cases did CEOs end up believing that profit was the game rather than merely one of several scoreboards?
Because I think that's how our business schools were teaching it. And our MBA programs and business schools, they were in basic economics, maybe from the economist first. And, not just Milton Friedman, he's oftentimes blamed and scapegoated, but the economist, I mean, one thing to think about, Gary, being able to make profits and money and save that, we take that for granted now, but that's actually historically relatively new. It was very difficult to accumulate capital in the past and be able to actually keep it safe and reinvest it. Generally, government oftentimes has been predatory, and they'd take the money from people. Or thieves would steal it. It was very hard to pass capital on from generation to generation. And so when we get into the Industrial Revolution and we start and Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, this was really the first time in history that substantial amounts of capital were being able to be retained and reinvested. And so economists were fascinated, and that's the time of Isaac, not too long after Isaac Newton's work had penetrated into the mainstream intelligentsia, and we saw the universe and we saw the economy as like a big machine. And capital was essential to the machine. Now, today's capital is not scarce, but it was very scarce historically. And the economists picked up on that and thought, wow, man, if we reinvest this capital, then we just got this perpetual motion machine and we make all this progress. And indeed, that's what's happened. We've made tremendous progress. We've lifted billions of people out of poverty, and we've created a world unlike any other world. And capitalism has been an amazing value creator. So I think, those are some of the roots of the origin of how we got this focus on making money, because it was hard to make. It wasn't easy to create capital, sustain it, save it, reinvest it. And that became sort of an imperative. And today, it's kind of like, it was like sort of like a monster that began to eat everything else up, becoming the only goal instead of recognizing that it's important and necessary, but not really the most important thing about business is not creating profits.
I think, let me be just slightly cynical for a moment. I'm not a cynical person by nature, I hope, but on this point, let me just be a little bit cynical because, I hear all this talk about purpose and I think it's right. And when you set out, whole foods, whole people, whole planet, this was a company that was united around a purpose of creating great food that was good for the planet and good for people. And that bound your company together. Having said that, I wonder now, there's a substantial number of companies that year after year after year don't do very well financially, that, are going along, missing opportunities, misusing society's resources, and the CEOs and the leaders get quite well paid despite that. In fact, it's a large number of the world's largest companies really are mostly going sideways, kind of treadmill organizations. Companies like, Amazon are fairly rare. And I worry just a little bit, John, that all this conversation about purpose, I understand that profit is not the only thing, but I worry sometimes if, sometimes we're playing this kind of as a card to distract the fact from, a lot of companies just aren't very well managed.
Well, that's true. I mean, no doubt. These are not mutually exclusive things, Gary. So one of the things that we have to do, and particularly if you adopt a more of a stakeholder model or more interdependent model, is that it's not a win-lose game. It's not either or. It's not purpose or profits. It's purpose and profits. It's about creating value for investors and creating value for customers and in creating value for employees and in creating value for the suppliers you trade with. Business is about creating value for all of these people that are voluntarily trading and exchanging with it. That's what's so amazing about it, because it's not just a few people winning. It's all of these people that are exchanging with the business are winning, or they wouldn't be making these exchanges in the first place. So purpose is necessary. It doesn't guarantee you success. It doesn't mean you're going to be a competent manager. It's just making sure that you've got the right, put purpose first. It doesn't mean that's the only thing. Purpose is very important, but by itself, it's not enough.
Back in two questions, and then Mackey is going to jump in and give me a break. So back in, I think, 1985, John, about 60 of your team members at Whole Foods got together and wrote this thing called a Declaration of Interdependence. Is maybe talk about that for a moment. Is that your point here, that we've kind of wrongly set this up as either or, and there's just no reason to think about it that way?
It's really not an either or, it's an and. We have the wrong framework to understand business. Business is a complex ecosystem consisting of a variety of different stakeholders, that's the best language we have today, that are interdependent, that exchange with each other for mutual gains. It's not this win-lose framework that we tend to see the world in. We tend to see things in dichotomies: win, lose, rich, poor, good, evil. And those are just inadequate. It's an inadequate framework to understand business. And yet we keep trying to see business in sort of a morality play, good versus evil type of thing, or winning versus losing. That's a sports metaphor where there's, one winner and a lot of losers. But business is really a win-win-win game, if you want to use a game metaphor. It's about lots of people winning, and it's about society making progress and advancing. Wealth doesn't cause poverty. That is a common mistake that people make in thinking about prosperity. If somebody's getting rich, it doesn't mean someone else is getting poor. And yet, that is how most people see it, or many people see it.
So let's take that just that last thing. You talked about, and it's undoubtedly true. Capitalism has lifted a couple of billion people out of poverty in our lifetimes. It's taken from 40% of humanity living in abject poverty to 10%, and that was capitalism. And yet, what we know at the moment is that 56% of people across the OECD believe that capitalism does more harm than good. That's an amazing. I'm not arguing the facts behind it, but they look at a world in which the wealthy are getting richer, where inequality in many countries has been going up. They see the 500-to-1 differentials between CEO salaries and frontline employees. I know that was never true at Whole Foods. They see the stock grants and so on going to a handful of executives at the top. They see the gig economy and automation kind of shitifying work, and so I suppose you can't really blame them for seeing a little bit as either or, because just empirically over the last 20 or so years, the CEO class and investor class has done a whole lot better than, let's call them, the employee class. So how, there's a tension there. I think right now only 29% of people in the United States believe that the system works for everyone. So how do we get this back in kilter? Is this just a perceptual problem, or are there real things here that need to be fixed?
I believe it's largely a perception problem, because the people that are telling that narrative are the anti-capitalists, the socialists, the Marxists, the university professors, the intellectuals, Gary. One of the things I've learned mostly from reading a lot of Deidre McCloskey's monumental works.
Highly recommended, yeah.
Yeah. Deidre taught me that, my God, business has always been hated. This is not new. Business has always been persecuted. It's always been envied. And the intellectuals have always hated business. I mean, if you go back, the Jews, for example, have been routinely persecuted because, not because they were Jewish, but because they were rich, because they were brilliant business people. They were brilliant merchants. And I saw this same thing with the Chinese in the East. I mean, you could say that the Chinese are the Jews of the East, but it's more accurate probably to say the Jews are the Chinese of the West, because the Chinese were also been persecuted by the intellectual elites around the world. And that's just the reality of business, because it creates wealth, it creates envy, and it creates resentment. And it all seems so unfair and unjust that some people accumulate more capital than others and become wealthy. It just seems unfair. But if you put things in historical context, there's never been a better time. I mean, it's not that the world moves in a straight line upward. But if you read Steven Pinker's work in Enlightenment Now, you can't read that with an open mind and not come away thinking, this is actually the best time it's ever been to be alive. Yeah, we got a lot of problems, but a lot fewer problems than we had 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 150 years ago. There's much greater prosperity. 200 years ago, Gary, 94% of everyone alive lived on less than $2 a day. Now we're down to like 8%. Well, 8% is too high, but it's a lot better than 94%. Or illiteracy rates. If you just go back 200 years ago, 88% of everyone alive couldn't read. Now only 12% can't read. The average lifespan was 30. Now it's 72 and a half across the planet. So by every objective measurement, we are making great progress. It's just not utopia. It's not perfect. And everybody's not equally well off. And I think probably because we evolved as tribal beings in small clans for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, we come out of families where socialism is kind of the norm in the family. That lack of total equality really rubs people the wrong way. So capitalism is always going to fight against that.
Maybe there's two things at work. One, what you're saying is, it may be that the critics of capitalism suffer from kind of an appalling lack of perspective. I mean, you can't take a snapshot of where we are at this moment in society. You have to look over the last 50 or 200 years and understand what's happened to global prosperity and so on, and start with that. But I think you'd equally say that, however better off we are, it's not like we now say like it's good enough and let's just like relax.
That's right.
I think
we have all these problems. You know what? Our generation, Gary, solved some problems that our parents' generations couldn't figure out. And at the same time now, there are some problems that are there that we have to deal with collectively and globally, and they need to be dealt with. And but human creativity, human ingenuity, if we allow it to actually be practiced, we don't stuff the genie back in the bottle, which they've been trying to get back in ever since it got out. We'll solve those problems collectively, because I think human creativity and ingenuity is pretty much limitless. And I've been amazed. Just think how different the world is 20 years just go back 20 years ago, not even 200 years ago. 20 years ago, Google was a young company and we were just starting to use it. Apple wasn't the largest company in the world. In fact, 20 years ago, the iPod was just getting invented. There was no iPhone. There were no smartphones. Everything people are addicted to today, they didn't even exist. There was no Uber. There was no Airbnb. It's simply, there's no Tesla. There are no electronic cars. It's in just 20 years. I mean, think about what it'll be like 20 years from now. It's going to be amazing if we continue to allow our entrepreneurs to create and innovate. And people are frightened because because the narrative they're told, terrible things might happen. And I guess they might. I mean, there's no guarantees. But our best chance to solve those problems is to allow innovation to continue to occur.
Hey, John, can I maybe point out a area of human development that maybe hasn't seen a lot of progress, and that's within the organizations, right? And the models they use to make decisions and the authority and the rights that people have in making decisions inside them. Because it seems to me that, while undoubtedly as a society we've progressed as you've outlined, we've been actually in a very flat part of the S curve when it comes to managed innovation. That is, a CEO from 1960 could come in and look at how some of these large companies work, an IBM or a GM, and yeah, they might be amazed at maybe some of the real-time statistics they can get, but it still looks pretty much the same. They have the same number of layers of management. Budgeting works kind of the same way. Performance review works the same way. The way capital gets allocated is top down and kind of formulaic, calendar driven once a year and all of that. And if you look at the scope of authority that frontline employees make, Whole Foods being an exception to that, it hasn't gotten better. And in fact, you could argue that things have gotten worse, that the agency and the discretion people have has actually shrunk. So can you maybe reflect on that? And do you agree with that general sense that, we haven't really made as much progress as we might have liked when it comes to organizational innovation? And if so, why? Yeah.
First of all, of course, we have not made as much progress as we should have made and could have made and probably will make in the future. So that's just kind of almost a truism. However, we have made progress. If you like me, if you read the biographies of people like Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller, it's like, that's not that long ago, 120 years ago. We've made a lot of progress since then. We really have. Those organizational structures were horrific. And that's why the labor union movement grew, because there was such rampant exploitation of workers. There was not the basic protections that existed for workers. They were social Darwinism. We were caught up in a philosophy of survival of the fittest. And so it depends upon our time frame again, but we have made progress. But maybe we haven't made as much progress in the last 50 years. Maybe that trend of progress has slowed down. And I think there are reasons for that. I think government regulation, for example, has radically increased. And as a result of government regulation, all corporations and lawsuits in a country like America. So government regulations and litigation ends up forcing the corporation to, particularly as it begins to make money, it becomes a target because it's got money. And I know for Whole Foods, I make a joke. The first 25 years, I didn't have any lawyers working for me. Now I probably have 100, because to protect us as much as they can from government and the predations of government and the predations of lawyers. And then you end up bringing more and more. So that part of that is you begin to slow down innovation because you've got this precautionary principle. If we do this, what might bad happen? And a lot of times, I make a joke sometimes at Whole Foods. It says, you need to hire some outside lawyers, because if you ask our internal legal team, they'll tell you not to do it because it's too risky. There's always risk involved, and something could go wrong. Something bad could happen. So, and I think it's true. I've seen it particularly I don't want to get into the COVID thing, but the precautionary principle is becoming sort of endemic to the whole culture now. We seem to be worried that bad things can happen, so it's more and more difficult to act. And there's a second thing that's worth talking about that I think slows down innovation and creates more bureaucracy, and that is professionalization. So one of the things I noticed at Whole Foods is when 43 years, you see a lot of evolution over time. And it's more difficult. When I think about all the people that were formed at Whole Foods in the early days and fewer professionals, they were caught up in the purpose and mission. But professionals are far more difficult to enroll in the purpose and mission of the organization because their first loyalty is generally to their profession, to the legal profession if they're lawyers, to the accounting profession if they're accountants, to the HR function if they're HR folks. And they know that, hey, working at Whole Foods can look really good on their resume when I get moved up to the next company. And their commitment to the purpose, their loyalty to the organization is not nearly what it it was, I mean, until we got bigger and had all these professionals come in to help protect us from all the other people that were attacking us. So professionalization sounds good. You're bringing little competent people in, and you need them because they're smart and they've graduated from the best schools and they're great professionals. And yet, that's their first loyalty to the profession, not to the mission, not to the organization. And it's very difficult to overcome that. So I don't think that's been written up enough, but I've known it firsthand.
Can we riff on that a minute, John? Because there's something there that certainly resonates with our view, and we might call it credentialism. And
Sure,
by the way,
same
there's nothing
thing.
wrong with having credentials for sure, and accomplishing things educationally and so on. But what it seems like to us is that, you know, we now talk about, and those who've listened to our series here will have heard this argument, but we'd like to get your take on this. You know, about half the jobs in the United States right now are so-called low-skilled jobs. And we kind of say that as if it's a death sentence. And the assumption is that because those jobs don't require whatever university degree, the people in them are also kind of low capability people. And it becomes a self-fulfilling kind of cycle, because if you don't teach them how to think like business people, if you don't give them the opportunity to learn, to contribute, to innovate, if they don't have any financial upside, yeah, pretty soon you have a bunch of drones who are working for you. But that's not who they are. They want to succeed. They want to move forward. They want their family to move forward. But we think that so often we've kind of have this us versus them, that, you know, there's the managers and the bureaucrats and the professionals, and then there's, like, you know, the employees, and it's if you like, it's kind of like bureaucratic privilege, and we think that's really toxic to unleashing the imagination and innovation of every team member. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that is fair. And it's, you know, I struggle against it. I always say at Whole Foods, the real life of this business is in our stores. And yet the reality that so many experience that work at our corporate headquarters is they're apart from where the real life of the stores, the life of the organizations in the stores. And to them, it's an abstraction, because they're not dealing with customers firsthand. They're not actually connecting with customers, and nor are they connecting with our team members firsthand. So they get distanced from it. And that's another reason why they're more loyal to their profession, is they don't really connect. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons that you had, you know, when you get a radical reformation of a society, like when you had communism overthrow everything in those countries, they would send people back to the farms and back to the factories, the intellectuals, so you could see what the people were actually doing. I always make my executives report to me. I say, you got to tour the stores. Otherwise, you don't really understand what's going on. You've got to talk to the team members. You've got to see what we're doing. So that's one of the ways I struggle against it. But there's a natural arrogance that comes about from, you know, going to Harvard Business School or to a top law school, or you begin to think it's kind of natural. You're sort of an elite. You're smarter and better than other people. They didn't get into these prestigious schools. They don't know what I know. They don't get paid as much money as I get paid, so I must be better than them.
I hope you're enjoying the conversation. I wanted to take just a quick moment to thank Hire for supporting the work of the New Human Movement. Hire is the world's leading appliance maker with subsidiaries around the world. Over the last decade, it's been leading a revolution in management. At Hire, every employee reports to customers, not to managers. And the company has worked hard to make entrepreneurship everyone's job. Now, back to our conversation.
I wanted to go to just get your take on why these manager and professional classes have grown as much as they did, right? Because in the research we did for the book, we went back and looked at the growth, right, by occupation. And what you see, if you go back to the early 80s to today, you know, the managers and support staff and, you know, HR, finance, and compliance, and not lawyers, and if you include lawyers, it's even greater. That more than doubled. They grew to 132% of what it was. for everybody else, for all the other occupation, the growth has been 40%. So they've grown like three times faster than the labor force more broadly. And the crazy thing is, when we look at a bunch of companies, Whole Foods, but also Haier, Nucor, Bertsorg, and others, what we see is that they operate at large scale very efficiently and very innovatively, with nowhere near the number of managers and administrators. So it's not as if this is an inevitable consequence of managing at large scale. There are alternatives. So why are we seeing this kind of growth?
One is regulations. A company has to add all these. As it gets larger, It becomes more a target of regulators. In every possible way, you have to see how corporations are regulated. And a lot of that staff comes in to fulfill compliance and to set rules and boundaries for what the regulators tell you to do. You have to do these things, and then this sort of protect the organization. And the second reason is lawsuits. I just cannot emphasize. I mean, Whole Foods is, seems like every day we get some kind of new lawsuit. And there's a third thing I didn't mention previously, but I think is increasingly important: activists. Activists of all types. Racial diversity activists, environmental activists of all kinds, animal activists if you're in the food business. The activists make demands. You want your supply chain to be completely pure all the way down, so there are no deviances. This is more and more corporations are faced with demands to conform to a certain vision the activists have of the world. When corporations resist, we live in the social media world where they end up being attacked, and CEOs and whatnot take the risk of being canceled if they don't. So there's a lot of intimidation going on. This also helps create bureaucracies to deal with that. I mean, if you're always being attacked by environmentalists, for example, and Whole Foods is, you create a sustainability team to deal with this, to show you what you're doing. And then the sustainability team may not even be loyal to the company. They may be more loyal to their environmental beliefs. And so they not only are not working for the company always, they may be working with the activists to try to move the company in a certain direction. Same thing can happen if you're being attacked for a lack of diversity or racial and gender equality, then you start counting everything up and you realize, oh my God, we're going to get sued. There's going to be a class action lawsuit. So then you begin to create a bureaucracy to try to deal with that. And that's how it grows, and it does grow. And I never want to talk about Amazon, but Amazon, Whole Foods being part of Amazon, has even grown more because there must not be another corporation in the entire world that's more criticized, more under the microscope than Amazon is. All the time, they're under the microscope, and now Whole Foods is too. So
we need to add here, John, just so I don't want viewers, listeners to I want them to appreciate that throughout the history of Whole Foods and starting it, you have been on the side of the environment. You have been on the side of giving more opportunity to employees. It's not that
absolutely.
You've been ahead of the curve on purpose year after year after year. But what I hear you saying, well, maybe you can go a little.
But that's our vision of how we can be environmentally responsible. Our vision of how we can be socially responsible. The activists have their own vision. And doesn't always sync up with what our vision is, and they are trying to force their vision onto our company, or threaten us, attack us. So activists are an important. What I've come to realize is activist is a type of stakeholder, and they are the critics of the organization. They can make you better. Some activists actually are right spot on, and they help make your company even better in these areas. But oftentimes, their vision is very utopian and not achievable. It's like an animal rights activist demanding that Whole Foods Market stop selling meat because it's animal cruelty. It's like, well, that's not going to happen. We can make our processes have a higher degree of animal welfare, but there's no way we're going to. Even if I tried to do that, I'd be removed as CEO before I could actually do anything. That's the simple reality. Since most of 95% of our customers eat animal foods, so it's a difficult situation corporations are put in. Now, Gary, the reason Whole Foods Market's still been able to innovate, despite growing bureaucracy, is we've been able to keep the store development process largely decentralized and regionalized. So most of the innovations that you see are happening in design because we have not centralized that into a bureaucracy just trying to do more efficient things. We allow experimentation in our new stores. We allow innovations. We allow failures.
I remember years ago you told the story. I don't know if it still exists, but I guess there was a team that created pubs inside of Whole Foods and or microbreweries. Can you give us a couple of examples of, because when I wrote about you many years ago, when I wrote about Whole Foods 2007 in the Future Management, I think you were 30,000 employees. You said now you're 100,000. And our experience is, yes, there's the external bureaucracy, but just as devastating for most companies is the internal growth, right? Every new challenge, you get a new CXO.
Right.
You go from having 3 layers to going 8 layers. The head office staff get bigger and bigger. Employees lose their share of voice. Decisions get pulled up to the top. So how have you, as Whole Foods has grown, and I know there are certain things that you are doing in a more coordinated or centralized way, but how have you kept that entrepreneurial spirit or that space for innovation alive within the stores?
By basically allowing them to innovate and try new processes without being punished, so that we've allowed them to have certain capital budgets so they can try different things. To recognize that Whole Foods has never had a cookie cutter approach where we're just stamping out stores that look exactly the same. Because we had this ethic of continuous improvement that every store should have new innovations that previous stores have not had. We challenge our regional leadership to say, what are you doing that we've never done before? What's something, and that doesn't mean most of it works. I mean, most of the new innovations don't work, but the ones that do work then get copied and they begin to spread across the company and the failures are wrapped up. So, and we don't punish our regional presidents, or because it's really most of that innovation is now happening on the regional level. We don't punish them for trying things that don't work out. We do expect them to learn from the mistakes of their peers, so we just allow that. We encourage that innovation. We reward it. We acknowledge it. We call it out, and we have a higher tolerance for mistakes, and that allows innovation to flourish.
So you're talking about both a budget thing, and we could expand on that for a moment, John. Is there kind of a budget set aside where as a store leader or one of your regional leaders, we can try stuff here without having to justify it to the last
without having to ask permission. Now, that's been a continued ongoing challenge at Whole Foods because mistakes get made, capital gets misallocated, and so people say, well, we shouldn't have done that. That was a waste of money. And there's a tendency to want to take that money away. And I'm always fighting to keep that money decentralized because I'm personally willing to tolerate some misappropriated capital, since I have great confidence that the people that want to control all that capital will also misappropriate it, just in larger quantities, and then they'll defend it.
That's what history shows.
So anyway, that's probably after I retire, Gary. I mean, I've been doing it for 43 years. I'm 67, so there will come a time that I will retire. I have little doubt that most of those innovations will start to disappear because the profession, all the original entrepreneurs are gone from Whole Foods. I'm the last man standing. Been there from the beginning, and know everyone else that I've built the company with really has left. So I'm pretty sure once I go, that a lot of these innovative processes that a lot of my professional class doesn't like will disappear. It's sad,
Is there no hope, John? Is there no hope? Can we roll the tide back?
It's here's a question for you. Very, very few I think Whole Foods will become more efficient. Amazon's helping us become more technologically savvy, more efficient, more professional in many ways. It's about the ability to innovate, really. And very few companies are able to maintain a high degree of innovation once the founder leaves. I mean, Apple's done very little innovation. They just make iPhones better and better. I'm not saying they don't innovate. I'm just saying that, where's the really breakthrough products that Steve Jobs was developing? I mean, they're not there. I think but most of the companies we most admire that are changing the world right now, Elon Musk, Tesla, Jeff Bezos is still at Amazon. Sergey Brin and Larry Page are still at Google. So most of these companies, the founders, the entrepreneurs are still at the helm. And when they go, I just think the great thing is that new entrepreneurs keep cropping up. And once you get too bureaucratic and ingrown, innovators come around and disrupt it. And that's how we make progress. The entrepreneurs make progress in the world. And other companies can maintain their momentum for a while, but eventually they get disrupted. That's the creative destruction of capitalism. And so even Jeff Bezos has come out publicly and said someday Amazon will die. I think that took a lot of courage for Jeff to say that. But it's obviously true, depending on our time frame. It might not be for 150 years, but it'll eventually happen.
I wrote a long time ago, I wrote an article for Fortune where I argue that Amazon may not be the final stage in retail evolution. Hard to imagine now, but it might not be.
It most certainly will not be, because new entrepreneurs who are not chained to the past in their thinking will think of. I mean, when I first heard about Uber, first time I got into Uber, I thought, I can't believe I didn't think of this myself. It seems so obvious, doesn't it, in retrospect? And what Jeff Bezos did with Amazon seems obvious in retrospect, but it was bold at the time. It was very bold. Frankly, what Whole Foods did, it was very innovative in its time. It seems sort of obvious now. Building a healthy, organic, natural supermarket chain, that seems kind of obvious. Nobody else was doing it, though. So,
I mean, I think we see maybe, John, a distinction between two kinds of CEOs, and I don't know where Jeff Bezos sits here, but I think he sits in the better category. I think they're CEOs who are great people, have like a vision of an opportunity, and they go execute and they build this thing, and the organization does it fantastically. But as you say, ultimately, the organization runs to the end of the founder's headlights, and then they kind of go sideways, and the entrepreneurs give way to the administrators, which then give way to the private equity people or whatever. And you can see that corporate life cycle. But I think there's another sort of CEO, and I think Jeff Bezos is in this category. I think Zhang Ruminant hires in this category, who say, like, it's not our vision. Our vision is not about one opportunity. Our vision is about creating an organization that can continue to reinvent itself. I mean, if you look at Amazon, arguably, they're innovating more broadly on more fronts than any organization in the world right now. And you have to argue, like, it's not Jeff Bezos that's behind every one of those things. He said, I want to create a company that's the world's biggest laboratory. We're just going to try more things, just as you're saying in Whole Foods, we want to try more things. Now, will that disappear when he disappears? Maybe. But I have the sense that Whole Foods is innovating without waiting for a sign-off on every one of these things, or without waiting for some secret group of innovators to come up with the next wonderful thing.
I think your point is some entrepreneurs are entrepreneurial about their organizational structure. And I think Amazon is, being part of it. I think that, however, do not underestimate Jeff's ability to spark ideas. I've seen him spark ideas in a number of different ideas. And then Amazon hires the best and the brightest, the smartest people. I mean, the first thing that struck me when I joined the company was how darn smart everybody was I was talking to was. Very, very intelligent people. They are hiring the very best people they can find. However, the number of real innovators in Amazon is maybe not as great as you think. And Jeff is the greatest innovator at Amazon, but he's also been brilliant at finding great people and inspiring them. I think don't underestimate the impact the founder has on just simply inspiring people to be more than they were. So we don't know what will happen when Jeff leaves, and hopefully he won't leave anytime soon. But very few companies are able to maintain that level of innovation, that same spirit, more than 50 years. It's very rare.
And that's absolutely true. I guess the question, and certainly is our passion and where our thinking is going, is Like, can you build an organization where that entrepreneurial spirit is just like there all the time? Can you build a company that's kind of a swarm of entrepreneurs? Because, the data says, and McKinney and I have looked at this. If you look at the unicorns in the world, the privately funded companies worth, $1 billion or more, they still represent a tiny fraction of any economy. The ones in the United States would represent about 3% of the value of the S&P 500. In Europe, it would represent less than 1% of the value of Europe's largest companies. And so, as important as entrepreneurship is, our argument would be we need that entrepreneurial spirit in every organization, because it is still these large, often very staid organizations that dominate our economy. They have all kinds of ways of putting obstacles in the path of the entrepreneurs. They're the ones sitting in Washington, shaping the competitive environment. And if they're not innovating, then, as an economy, we've lost a lot of dynamism.
Here's the thing. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think you're taking a snapshot again, Gary. You're looking at, if you go back 50 years and look at who was dominating 50 years ago, which of those companies are still dominating? None of them. Actually, none of them are. IBM dominated computers. Does anybody think they dominate them today? General Motors dominated automobiles. Anybody think they dominate them today? And so I think they're all disrupted. And so these companies that dominate today, they will be disrupted. These guys will not be on top in 50 years. I don't know who will be. Biotech company that we can't even imagine, who invents some life extension thing that we can't even, so people are living to be 200 if they take their particular elixir. Or do some gene therapy and reprogramming their genes, or they have nanotechnology that, who the heck knows? I don't pretend to know. But I bet you anything that these companies that seem so dominant today will not be so dominant 50 years from now. And they may still exist, but they'll be shadow of their former selves. And that's not a bad thing. And by the way, helping these companies to be more entrepreneurial, which I think in some ways is part of your life's work, that's a good thing, because they need to be more entrepreneurial. So rage against this growing bureaucracy. That's been your message. It's inspired me, and you've taught me a lot, and that's helped me try to fight against the whole huge bureaucracy. But it is kind of a thing that just grows for the reasons I did mention previously.
John, let me come back. We're going to run out of time shortly, and I want to leave the last couple of questions to McKinley. Let me come back, though, to one thing that you said, I think the first time I ever talked to you or I heard you speak. You said, when we set out to build Whole Foods, I wanted to build a company based on love instead of fear. And, and many years later, I heard Herb Kelleher at Southwest say something similar about, a company does better when it's bound together by love instead of fear. And yet, in all of my life of listening to CEOs and so on, you are the only two leaders who I've ever heard use the L word. Like, why is this so important? Building that sense of community, building a company. And so first, what did you mean by that? Why is it so important? And why is it still so rare? Why are we so reluctant to talk about this?
That's such a great question, and it's a long question in a way. So I don't know how much time we got left, but I'll start on it. Okay. Well, one thing I will say that in my business experience, if you give people two things, they will work with your company forever. They will because it's what people want. They want purpose and they want love. And so the purpose is beginning to penetrate into the corporate psyche, even though it's still got a ways to go. But love is not. But that's why people stay at Whole Foods, relationships. And that's why I'm still there. All the relationships that I built over time, the people that I love and care about. I mean, it's like being the Marines in a foxhole together. You bond in a deep way. You face these challenges. You have these triumphs. You have these failures. You have these setbacks. And you just get really close to people. But here's the thing about love, Gary. I challenge anybody that's listening to this to think about when you're on your deathbed. I promise you what you're going to be thinking about on your deathbed. You're not going to be thinking you wish you'd worked harder or that you'd made more money. you're going to be thinking about your relationships. You're going to be thinking about the people you love. You'll be thinking about your children or your grandchildren or your wife or your husband or your parents, because those are what matter the most in life, are our relationships. Why do we think it's any different in corporations? I think we do think it's different because of the metaphors we use to think about business, which are almost all hyper-competitive. War metaphors, we're going to crush the competition. Let's retreat to the war room and make our campaign, our marketing campaign, to crush our competitors. Or we think about it from Darwinian metaphors of survival of the fittest. It's a jungle out there. Only the paranoid survive. It's kill or be killed. Or they're sports metaphors, which maybe is a little bit better, but they're sports metaphors where there's a winner and there's everybody else is losers. And so we want to be winners. At least the sports metaphors have teams and your team spirit, esprit de corps, and that type of thing. So better metaphors. But they're all hyper competitive. And I always think back to that movie Patton, which one, maybe I'm dating myself because maybe most of your listeners never saw that movie, but it was 1970. And there's this classic scene in there where General Patton comes in and there's this guy that's clearly suffering from PTSD and he's shell-shocked. And Patton says, "What's wrong with you, son?" And he's shaking and he's all shook up and he just calls him a coward. And then he says, "Son, you've let everybody down. You are just a coward sitting here. Nothing wrong with you. You should be out fighting." And he gets more and more enraged at him until the point he says, "You know what? You should be court-martialed." And then he moves from being court-martialed to, "You should be executed." And he starts to go back and get his gun so he can shoot this guy. And of course, his aides stop him. "General, you cannot execute this man." But the point of it is, where can there be any love when you're fighting a war, Gary? Check it at home. We're going to war here. Check love at the door because we're going to battle. And love is something you do with your family. It's something you do outside of work. But, we're about winning. We're about surviving. And so we leave the most important part of our humanity. We hide it in the corporate closet. And yes, there's an element of competition in business. And I don't want to say that doesn't exist. It's there. But that's not really what business is about. Business is really about creating value for other people. It's about value creation. Competition is one way that we get better at value creation. For one thing, because we have to stay on our toes. We didn't have competition, everything would get to be corrupted because people would have the same kind of urgency. They wouldn't be studying their competitors, trying to get ideas from them so they can get better. And yet what I found in business is that when you take love out of the corporate closet and you let people feel that they are cared for and that they're part of not just a team but a larger family, that and they can be more fully human, you're giving them what their soul most craves, which is belongingness, which is to be in a community of people where they feel safe and they feel cared for, when they're not bringing out the knives to everybody's trying to knife you to move up above you. So purpose and love, that's why those are the first two chapters of Conscious Leadership.
As a leader, I heard one anecdote, when you would review stores, when you'd walk through stores, it was your habit, even though there were things you saw that weren't right, and you'd have a private conversation with the store leader and talk about that and try to get some things fixed. You were mostly there to praise people and say, great job. But how does that impulse of love work itself out practically? What does that mean in terms of policy or your behavior as a leader?
Well, first of all, love is not, we think of it as primarily an emotion. And of course, there is a feeling to love. But love is mostly a set of skills that we can develop. Gratitude, generosity, care, compassion, forgiveness. These are all qualities of love. It's a very complex emotion. And we can become more skilled at it as we practice it. And so how does that show up in the world? Mostly I'm seeking the good of each person that I'm with. I try to be there. They're not just cannon fodder that I can use. They're each as an individual that I should respect as an equal and be kind to and loving. And that doesn't necessarily mean I can't fire anybody. I've fired lots of people over the years. I mean, dozens and dozens of people. But you can do that in a loving way too. You can do that in a conscious way where it's like you're struggling here, and you know that because we've given you plenty of performance reviews, and this is you're not happy here, and you're not, and it would be best for both of us to make a change. There are ways to do that in a loving, kind way. So to be fully human, Gary, we have to bring love into the workplace. Now, I'm not talking about romantic love. God knows that's probably going to happen anyway, but it's not necessarily, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about eros. I'm not talking about sex for sure. I'm talking about love, the kind of love we have with our friends and our families and the people we're close to, just caring about people, wanting what's best for them. And if you're going to create a great organization, you have to care about your people. You have to love them. And you have to love them as a group, but you have to love them as individuals. And that's deeply fulfilling for me personally, but it's deeply fulfilling for the team members. They trust me. Can you really trust somebody if you don't feel like they care about you? You can't. How do you build trust? We hear a lot about creating trust in organizations. The foundation of trust is love. And we need to get good at it because we're not very good at it. And a lot of the executives that get promoted are sort of jerks. At Whole Foods, I try not to promote the jerks. I try to promote the caring people who are also competent.
Yeah, I'm thinking about all the hundreds of like leadership competence models I've seen in my life, and they will talk about emotional intelligence and authenticity, and even sometimes empathy. But I've never seen love as a descriptor there.
Let's call it what it is.
Never.
Because it's hidden. Because people feel like they'd be seen as wimps. They think love is weak. Love is not weak. Love is hard. Love is powerful. Love is what knits people together. And you know what? America has a love affair. And if you look at a lot of our masculine heroes over the generations, they've always been tough on the outside, but deeply caring on the inside, right? They've got this shell around them because they've got to go out and do the tough things that are out there. But deep down, they are really, really caring people. But we're not living in that era any longer. We can be more authentic and more expressive of our feelings and care. And, one of the things we do at Whole Foods, and maybe this will be a good place to end this, the simplest way I know how to wake up love in an organization is to practice appreciations. At Whole Foods, we end every meeting with appreciations. Nobody has to do them. They're voluntary. But it's very hard to appreciate somebody, and you can't actually appreciate somebody in an authentic way without opening your heart, because otherwise the person knows you're just bullshitting them. They can feel it. They can feel when somebody's really authentically appreciating them. And it's very hard if somebody's appreciated you in an authentic way to maintain judgments about them. You begin to like, wow, I've got to rethink what I was thinking about Beth. She clearly, she genuinely cares about me. I had no idea. This is fantastic. And it melts down the barriers. Appreciation is it's kind of like a stealth action you can take that's not too threatening, but it begins to unleash love in the organization. So I always encourage people, if you got nothing else from my talk, just try ending your meetings with appreciations and watch what happens. I've had so many CEOs come back and tell me we started doing that and our organization made a big shift.
It's a very, very cool suggestion. Very practical. Michele, last question or thought?
So perhaps, John, we talked about what we can do within our organizations to humanize them and spread the power of love. Do you have any thoughts on what we might be able to do at a more systemic level to encourage more organizations to follow the kind of examples you're setting? You mentioned during a conversation a few levers. One was education, and perhaps another one was regulation. But I don't know if there's any, if you were given a magic wand and said, there are three things you could change in how education is done, regulation is done, what gets measured, what gets compensated, what more across organizations, what would they be?
There's no silver bullet. There's just a lot of hard work. Putting purpose first, leading with love, teaching integrity, seeking win-win solutions. You have to raise consciousness, and that's not easy. Because you know what the challenge is? Business people are good at doing things. We're doers. We have to-do lists, and we schedule out the entire day. But most of the real work that needs to happen is inner work. You develop emotional intelligence by practicing it. You develop spiritual intelligence by practicing it. I said love is a set of skills that you have to work on and develop. So we need, almost everything we do teaches the intellect, and business people are doers. So they have little patience for, if they read books, they want to read the 1 Minute Manager, or they want to read books that are, who moved the cheese. They want simple books because they're busy people. I get that. But yet, so that's why I don't think there's a simple answer, because what we need to do is raise consciousness. And that's going to require leadership development. One of the healthy things that's going on is we have a lot of executive coaches that are out there now that are working with these CEOs who are getting them to be more reflective, just being more reflective, examining their decisions, thinking about other stakeholders, thinking about, is this good for all? Is this good for our team members? Is this good for our customers? I think those are the things that are necessary. And guys, I'm going to have to sign off. I'm actually supposed to be on this call right now with this Facebook, because I'm going to do it. They want me to do a talk with them, and I'm in the pre-talk with them. So I got to go. I'm past 5. Thanks, guys. Hey, you guys are an inspiration to me. You've had a big influence on me, Gary, in the books that you guys have written. Keep doing what you're doing. You've made a bigger impact on the world than you realize, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
I appreciate you guys. That's my appreciation to you.
And we appreciate your example and your leadership. And
bye, guys.
Thanks a ton.